shoppers have returned to stores across England today after non-essential retailers opened their doors at the end of a 4-week national lockdown. As the tiered system comes into play, high street stores have slashed their prices in the run-up to Christmas following the collapse of companies like Debenhams, Topshop, Burton, Dorothy Perkins. And this morning, Bon Marche, another one, has gone. So how can businesses and the high street recover? John Caudwell is a business leader, philanthropist and founder of Phones for You. John, afternoon to you. It's always good to get your view on these things. It's been a pretty grim week of headlines for the high street, though.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian. Yes, it has, but it's nothing different to what I've been forecasting since March, because it was always very, very obvious that this was going to be catastrophic for the high street. We already had the erosion of the high street as a consequence of online businesses over the last 20 or 30 years. But that was going to be evolutionary. And then suddenly the pandemic put all the customers into the online area and took them away from the high street. So this is a revolutionary devastation for the high street.
And in terms of recovery, I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, retail, like any other sector, has a habit of finding its own levels, its own marketplace, etc. But, as we've just run over, there is an irredeemable reality about the online world that makes it perhaps more challenging than it's ever been.
Yeah. Well, I think the trouble is, Ian, and people are not realizing this yet, that the consequences of what has happened in this revolutionary last 9 months is going to stretch across every person in this country, because the high street will never recover. I mean, it'll recover partially, but it'll never recover to pre-pandemic, because all of those businesses have gone. But also the online businesses have, as a consequence of the pandemic, seduced a lot more customers and got a lot more customers into online buying habits. Now, the problem is with this is that all of those empty units in the high street are devaluing the value of properties in the high street. We've already seen that as a consequence of these big businesses going out of trading business, that what happens is they left with black holes in the pension fund. But there's another black hole in the pension funds that are building up that is going to affect so many people in a disastrous way. And that is that most of these high street properties are owned by pension funds, rely on the rental income for yields. Yeah. And what's going to happen now, of course, is they lose the yield because the business has gone out of business. But also then there's a massive downward pressure on rentals. But all of these people have spent a fortune buying these properties with a rental yield at, say, 5%, and now that's going to start to collapse. So, it is tough times ahead, and it's why I've said the government must keep adopting all of the motions in my Caudwell Pandemic Recovery, and a few more beside that I haven't talked about very much, like supporting the change of high street use into residential to try and breathe some life back into the community.
And in terms of your suggestions, I know you're urging the government to borrow more money to invest rather than consider a return to austerity. How would that work, John?
Well, the simple fact is that it's very, very cheap to borrow money, virtually cost-free for the government. It will remain virtually cost-free for probably the next 10 years. There is not going to be any increase in interest rates of any significance for at least 10 years. So the government can borrow money. Now, if you were just an ordinary business and you could borrow money at next to nothing and invest it to make profit, you would do so. But it's even more compelling for the government because they can borrow money, create businesses or help create businesses that bring jobs in and wealth in. But the other aspect of this that doesn't apply to a business is that they save money on the other hand, because they're not having to pay out unemployment benefits and social benefits, and they're increasing their tax revenue from all the people that are in work and from VAT. So it's a double win for the government. So it's an absolute no-brainer to do this. The challenge is you've got to do it intelligently. You've got to do it with operational skill and really use this money to generate real long-term wealth and real long-term jobs. And if they can do that, the Conservative government will come out the heroes of this century. And if they don't do it, they will preside over a fiasco.
Yeah. In terms of your own endeavours, I mean, your successes are widely known. Would you go back into the high street, John? Would there be any business model that would enamour you to return to a shop-based model?
Absolutely not, no. The future for 20 years has been online, and all the successful players in the future will be online players. It doesn't mean there isn't space for you to have sub shops, sort of as boutique shops that express your brand. So it doesn't mean you can't do a few shops, but no, the model's changed forever. And in any event, why would you want the risk of a 20-year lease with high rentals when you can do all this online and produce risk-free revenue?
Do you think that's where Philip Green perhaps went wrong? It's interesting that I hadn't really thought about this until this Arcadia story broke this week, John. But, Next is an obvious example of a company that was ahead of the game when it came to online. Their online model is incredibly efficient. It's very customer friendly. You click, you collect, or it's delivered. If you don't like it, you go back. You haven't even got to have your receipt. It's barcoded to return it. Very efficient. And yet Topshop, considering that their client base, which was young people, really didn't go down the online route very, very efficiently.
Yeah, I know. It's very surprising, isn't it? Because back in 1993, when online really almost didn't exist, I set up an online business within Phones for You, and we pushed like fury to maximize that business. It was only about 3 or 4% of our sales, but I knew it was going to grow. And we needed to be ready to pounce and ready to take every last sale that we possibly could from the online business, have the expertise, have the slickness of operation, ready for this transition from retail shops to online. So I think the Arcadia Group have been very, very slow to adapt. I think also, there's a lot of money been paid out of Philip Green's business into dividends into Monaco, into his wife. So that has stripped value out of the businesses that they could have used to help them survive. But I also think that they've not kept up with the times with their product range. Yeah. So I think a lot of good things have gone wrong in Arcadia, but of course the pandemic is the straw that broke the camel's back, because that has been a fiasco for anybody in the high street.
Yeah, you don't fancy a stab at Topshop, John?
No, thank you. No, most of my time anyway is spent on philanthropy, and I'm just very passionate about changing people's lives. And since this pandemic, I've found myself very interested in trying to influence the politicians, because I have a crystal clear view of what needs doing in the UK that can make the Tories heroes. And if they don't do what I'm saying, they're going to preside over a very horrible next 3 or 4 years. They will then lose the next election. Labour will be in power for the next 10. And I really fear for the future of Britain. Yeah. So it's caused me to campaign very, very, very strongly for Caudwell Pandemic Recovery, and for me to contribute in any way that I can to encourage that.
Have you ever thought, and not a facetious question, John, genuine question, of going into vaccines? I mean, Bill Gates has, everybody thinks he's the Antichrist as a result of it, apparently, because we're told there's some spooky reason behind his benevolence in that area. But I mean, that he's found himself as a philanthropist, and that's where he's chosen to spend his time.
Yeah, well, my time is spent over a whole range of illnesses. I mean, for instance, Pans Pandas, which nobody in the UK hardly knows about. I sponsored Stanford University last year to further the research, and they wrote a letter to me only 2 days ago to say how amazing the results were of that research. Wow. And how this is now on the point of starting to transform the lives of youngsters affected by Pans Pandas. And I can use my skills and my money and my time over a whole range of neglected illnesses, and hopefully make little bits of transformation here, there and everywhere to humanity.
Which is fabulous. Really just tell us, John, what is that disease that you just referred to?
Oh, Pans Pandas is horrible, because a lot of kids get it. It causes mental illness, which causes depression, OCD, ADHD, causes all sorts of mental problems. And in the worst cases, kids commit suicide because of it. In lesser cases, they manage to survive, but with no quality of life whatsoever. And at the very mild end, maybe just suffer from a little bit of depression or a little bit of OCD and ADHD. And it's caused by an infection, the strep infection in the tonsils, and that crosses the blood-brain barrier and causes the basal ganglia in the brain to put the body into fight and flight, put the brain into fight or flight, causes devastation. And I believe that there are huge percentages of UK children who are mentally ill, huge percentage of those that are mentally ill that is caused by this. And that's what I'm setting out to either prove or disprove, but at least help those that have got it.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, there's virtually no medical help for them.
John, it's always great to have you on, and that was fascinating, that last point as well. Thank you, John Caudwell, business leader and philanthropist, with us here on Talk Radio.